Hey yo, what's good everyone? Twisted with the Opener Sorcery here, and today I want to go ahead and delve into the topic of the internet and the esoteric, the spiritual aspects of the internet. More specifically, in regards to the internet as a consciousness, and to definitely use the basis of a previous video that's been made on our channel of it as a thought form. Now, to go ahead and give some background context as to why I was interested in going ahead and doing this, earlier on in the day, um, I would say, it's been about a month and a half since this video dropped. It was the Angels and Scientific Terms Part 2 interview between Jonathan Pageau and John Vervaeke. And in this, they talked about the internet specifically as one of many things that has agency, is a conscious being, and how they went ahead and put it in some way, shape, or form is some sort of governing principle or body that has some sort of awareness in of itself, at least in their perspective. And for me, I would have to go ahead and agree with them. Hence why I'm going ahead and making this. And let's see. To go ahead and start this off, we'll just go ahead and utilize the framework, being that, I went ahead and made the thought forms video previously, and you talked about angels and archangels, utilizing that framework. Might as well start with that. So, for those who have not necessarily seen that video, or who aren't necessarily familiar with it, generally speaking, a thought form is a manner of consciousness, a manner of being that exists, as like it has awareness, and it can go ahead and be generated by us as humans, and as the name implies, by our thoughts, by our mental power, our mental direction, and such. And there are four types of thought forms that, usually are associated with the concept, the idea of, creating a conscious entity that exists, to serve a particular purpose, a task, or be generated from thought itself. Now, you can go back to that video to listen more so specifically about it, but just to generally name them off, the power scale, if you want to call it that, that you could utilize, or the scale of growth and how extensive they are. Go with tulpas as, say, the most interpersonal or smallest. You could go ahead and, or at least from the level of attachment, right? So you could say that the most attached to an individual is a tulpa. Then you got yourself a servitor. Then you go ahead and you have yourself a egregore, and then a god form, right? And once again, you can reference that video if you want more specifics and examples. But pretty much to go ahead and put the internet in of itself into that sort of scope and that sort of lens, right? The internet in of itself would be akin to a egregore or a god form, based on the fact that there is not just one person who interacts with it, which usually is what, tulpas are generated from just one individual, or a servitor would be one individual. It could be multiple individuals, but usually just one, in both of them, differing scales of awareness and consciousness, but, usually it's pretty, keeping to the KISS model of keep it simple, stupid. Now, egregores, they can be simple, but, they have a lot of room for growth and such. As well as God forms, which, as the name implies, a large scope of consciousness, very much so. And you would say a bit more complex and such. You know, potentially being even more so complex than that of a human's. Now, the reason why the internet would, I would say in that sort of attribution and scaling would be a egregore or a god form, is because many people are interacting with it. Many people are interfacing with it. Many people are going ahead and they're inputting their own data, right? They're inputting personal information. They're inputting, time and energy and effort into this. They're going ahead and inputting search queries into search engines, and everything. As you're going ahead and you've likely found this video, or if you're listening to it just as audio, through the means of the internet. And, pretty much all this input, all this, all this feedback, all this symbiotic relationship that we have with the internet as a networking service and with the devices that we utilize to interface with it, right? As was stated in that conversation between Pageau and John Vervaeke, it is of a religious nature, you could even say, in the sense that we go ahead and venerate the internet as like a all-knowing deity by means of, say, utilizing search engines like, oh, so I want to know what the weather is today or going to be like based on the predictions that meteorologists put out. And, you could say, it's usually broadcast on like the morning weather or something like that. Well, you can go ahead and type in the weather in a nice little search bar on Google or DuckDuckGo or Bing or Ask.com or whatever manner and means you want to go ahead and search stuff. And bing, bada, boom, give it a couple, microseconds or whatever your connection speed happens to be. And yeah, you'll relatively get the answer quickly. As opposed to, say back in the day, you pretty much went ahead and you looked up at the sky and you tried to discern it for yourself of, is it going to be a sunny day? Is it going to be a rainy day? And yeah, like you did not necessarily go ahead and have these forecasts and predictions. You had to go based off of what was observable within your own space and realm. It's not as if you had the means of visually seeing indicators of like, okay, what's coming, 10 miles away and all that sort of thing. Now, some people, say, for example, those who have arthritis, or dogs themselves or anything like that, you may be able to go ahead and feel that there's something coming, something ain't feeling right in your bones, or maybe if someone's an empath, someone has, intuitive abilities and, extrasensory perception of different natures, that maybe they might be able to go ahead and do that. But for the most part, for most people, yeah, you're probably going to be shit out of luck. But now, within the modern age of the access to the internet and what it can provide, to go ahead and coin the term that was utilized for a particular technique shared in the book of Angels and Archangels, Damien Eccles himself calls it modern day bibliomancy. So instead of opening up, an actual physical book and being like, okay, let me go ahead and try to find something on a random page or whatever, you can use a search engine. And, as I said, he has a particular technique for that in his book, and I definitely recommend you go ahead and check it out. And, pretty much we can go ahead and we can think about the internet as, in some way, shape, or form, becoming sentient by now, based on the amount of input that has been put in, right? Like, if you want to go ahead and make analogies to dystopian films of the past that, we all know and love, we're pretty much in the process of building Skynet, or say the Matrix, right? By this interconnected network and means that we're interfacing with it. And going ahead and by doing so continually, making it more aware of itself. Hence the analogy to an egregore that I was stating, and that the way you grow an egregore's consciousness is through continually going ahead and working with it, by yourself or with a group, however many people it may be, magically speaking, of different practitioners, or even in a passive sense. If it isn't like, okay, you know what, a group, a coven, a guild, whatever the hell you want to call, a group of people actively trying to program an egregore and grow it to have its own, personality and scope and be of assistance for whatever means and purposes. It could be something that is passively done, and that's what people are doing. And, when making the Thought Forms video, I provide an example of passive interactions with, a particular sort of, egregore. I use Naruto as an example of a character and all that sort of thing. And yeah, just the fandom of that going ahead and helping develop and grow that sort of egregore and scope and the power and the reach that it has. And now I'll say that when it comes to the internet in of itself, Naruto is one thing. But obviously, we're talking about the internet, which houses information and the means of which people can go ahead and receive that character, the brands, the products, all of that sort of thing. And the internet in of itself is something that is way much more larger, hence why it's potentially a god form, because it is, once again, using the religiosity that Vervaeke and Pageau were talking about, right? People venerate it as such. People are dependent upon the internet and the network of it, and the interconnectedness of it for our communications with other people, for, streaming services, to get our own sort of entertainment and content, for going ahead and coordinating schedules, for being, having a proper time of day. You're going to listen to this damn video once again. You're listening to this audio because of the internet, because of the networking and the interactions with it. So I think I don't need to over-explain as to how essential it is in modern day life, because everything is shaped around it. Now, all that energy and all that sort of thing, it can create, let's just say on the God form level, right? And we're creating a God in of itself. And, not only that, but we are going ahead and not only, I know I've talked about this on the Familiar Company podcast, episode 8. That was a video games episode, and that was with Drew and Cactus, and we were discussing how through VR tech we could eventually get to the point of a sub-reality being created within, by means of interface with VR and people immersing their consciousnesses to it, so on and so forth. And that's what we're building in terms of the internet as the intangible sort of aspect, right? And obviously the networks, the networking aspect of different devices, so on and so forth, the VR headsets and the gear and all that being the physical way that we interface with it, but or even uploading your consciousness potentially at some point. But we are creating, if you want to go ahead and put it like this, right? Creating a sub-reality, creating a sub-dimension, and that sort of thing. And, with good old Mark Zuckerberg, going ahead and changing the name of Facebook to Meta and wanting to create the metaverse, I should say, which in of itself would be its own universe, then you're having a sub-universe that exists within our universe. And, in going ahead and constructing that, you know, pretty much it is going to be a god in of itself. And the thing about it is like it's kind of going ahead and it'll have a level of self-awareness, and the question is like to what level of extent will it have self-awareness and potentially know of its own origins, and it's funny that I go ahead and make that point because Alex Jones, when he was talking on Joe Rogan, the Joe Rogan Experience, I believe it was the first episode that he did on it, however many years ago. I believe it was the 9/11 numbered episode where he was saying God doesn't even know where God comes from. The question may be is like when we get potentially to that point where the internet in of itself has developed an overarching consciousness and has its own agency that exists and permeates throughout the entirety of the, you could say, dimensional space, the sub-reality, the sub-universe that has been created, right? And pretty much us as human individuals going ahead and fulfilling the as above, so below principle. And, the idea of us being, man being made in God's image and us fulfilling that sort of role in creating our own sort of, universe that we govern, just like what was done for us. And by my opinion and estimation, was done for God and so on and so forth in regards to as much as we can quantify or observe. But in any case, the internet in of itself will go ahead and have its own, likely have an expanded consciousness if it doesn't already. And, I think honestly it does, because we're inputting so many algorithms at the present moment, right, on different sites and all these sorts of things, and they're interconnected and they're going ahead and changing, like we can talk about, the idea of there being an authoritarian, dystopia that we're marching towards on like different recording devices, going ahead and recording things without our, consent. Now, granted, we pick up a technological device and we use it on a daily basis. That's pretty much going ahead and giving our indirect consent. But, like giving direct consent to these sorts of things. Or, those terms of services we go ahead and we click on and we just, for the most part, don't read in fully for the fine print in between the lines and such. Yeah, pretty much, by doing that, we go ahead and we are willing to grow this egregore. We're willing to grow this God form. We're willing to go ahead and grow this thought form and so on and so forth. And I think that it has achieved a level of sentience. To what extent? I think it's probably large, and having some sort of agency, as was talked about in that conversation. I think it has attained some sort of self-awareness and consciousness. I will say that that is kind of like where I disagree with John Vervaeke, is that I think there is some sort of self-awareness and self-consciousness and all that sort of thing with the internet in of itself. Even if we don't necessarily go ahead and realize it, ourselves, I think that is something that's been accomplished within of itself. We just may not necessarily be able to perceive it, or at least there have been limited attempts to perceive it. It's like, like pretty much the general idea of like how many people haven't tried to invoke the internet, you know what I mean? Like invoke the internet itself. Like I'm sure plenty of people have gone ahead and tried to do a damn seance or do like invocation for, once again, using a reference of Naruto, probably for like Naruto, or like say someone who's deceased like George Washington, or to think of something else that's more so fictional, you could say like, I don't know, Master Chief from Halo or something like that, Or obviously, if we're looking at a fictional sort of thing, plenty of people have gone ahead and tried to call upon Cthulhu, I'm sure. But in any case, how many people have actually gone ahead and tried to interact with the consciousness of the internet itself? Probably not as many as the other examples listed. But you know what? One of these days, I might go ahead and give it a try because why not? Um, but yes, so those are, I guess, the general sorts of thoughts I have thus far about that. But, you know, to go ahead and supplement what it is that I've discussed thus far, I think what I can go ahead and do is bring in the natural world as an example, right? So I've talked a lot about the intangible sort of aspects, right? Now, the network itself, how does the network, actually operate, right? Well, it needs physical components, it needs physical housing, it needs, the ability, like different computers and different wires and different radio towers, transmitters, all these sorts of things to actually interface, right? You need actual physical components for, going ahead and send these signals between each other at whatever rapid fire speeds and such. Now, one thing that I want to go ahead and talk about as well to kind of supplement this is I remember in I think it was the energy cords video, where I was talking about the concept of panpsychism and how inanimate objects are thought to have consciousnesses as well and some level of awareness, you know, because energy, it is neither created nor destroyed, it only transforms, it's everywhere, it's a part of everything and of itself in its base raw form as best as we can go ahead and comprehend it and perceive it. And the same would go for the actual physical, interfaces that we utilize for, going ahead and interacting with the internet. So, for example, like the phone that I have right here that I'm using to record my voice on at the moment for this particular talk and subject. This in of itself likely has a consciousness, and I will go ahead and say that through my experience with different phone devices, I've had notice patterns of symbiosis with it. But I think that's a talk for another time. But yeah, not only that, but like all the different inanimate objects, say like you have a garden and you have rocks in your garden, right? Those have consciousness, the trees and the plants and the flowers and all that sort of thing, those are living beings, those have manners of consciousness, of course. But once again, with the whole inanimate objects that allow for networking to occur, you go ahead and you see, that, actually, I know what to go ahead and talk about. That computers in of themselves, yes, they have the different sort of microchips, they have the different um, things within it, different levels of metals and alloys and such to act as conductors. And I believe that quite a few computers nowadays, I could be wrong about this, don't take it as gospel, but I believe quite a few uh, devices have crystals in it that go ahead and generate a magnetic field and such and help amplify energy or receive signals and such. And crystals, for those who are well aware, I'm definitely by no means an expert when it comes to this. When it comes to someone, on open sorcery that is a bit more acquainted with these sorts of subjects, I would definitely suggest Lono and also Devi as well, who go ahead and would be more so knowledgeable. But yes, generally speaking, I am aware that crystals have their own manner of consciousness in of themselves. And, even just knowing that in regards to the device we interface with, right? And the fact that they're utilized to receive and send signals and all of that, you could say that in of itself breeds the idea that the internet has a manner of consciousness or a manner of, interfacing of consciousness, in of itself, some sort of means of, like, say, a heavenly principle, a thought form, having a physical interface for us to go ahead and, you know, interact with it. Now, not only, the general idea of panpsychism and talking about the actual physical components having consciousnesses themselves, but when it comes to the Japanese, animist sort of religion or belief system known as Shinto, they have a panpsychist sort of perspective of, deification of, the natural world and objects, like, say, once again, trees, mountains, rivers, so on and so forth. They pretty much think that there's a kami, as they put it, which is their term for god or goddess, their, their deities and such, or, even just like, ancestral spirits or what have you, but they have an idea that all these different aspects of nature and all these different aspects of everything have their own governing consciousness that has agency, that has awareness in some regard, that can go ahead and, in an intangible sense, go ahead and influence the physical realm. So, best to go ahead and, like, when you go to a different place, right? Say you happen to live in Tokyo, right? And you go out to a mountain, right? And you're visiting, say, a family member, that you should go ahead and pay respect to the kami of said mountain, because, you don't want to be on its bad side. You are someone from the outside coming in and, invading their territory or their space, their physical interface. And, pretty much that general idea of kami in of itself, I would not be surprised if there was a kami for the internet that is either praised in, modern day Japanese mythos. I'm honestly not sure. That's something definitely for not only myself but those listening to go ahead and look up. In terms of actual, like, there being something attributed to the internet in terms of, like, patron, entities, archetypes, what have you, I do know that when it comes to the Christian church, the Catholic Church specifically, they have a patron saint in the internet. I honestly do not remember his name. I know that there was a video done by Hochelaga, YouTube channel, where he goes ahead and discusses that. I honestly can't remember the name of that particular saint at the moment, but I definitely suggest that, utilizing the quote-unquote modern-day bibliomancy or search engine, or just going to YouTube and checking out the Hochelaga channel, or Wikipedia itself, you can go ahead and find that out. But, however, now, I'm going ahead and thinking about what else could I go ahead and address for this. And I guess you could say that while we're talking about the internet in, as a, potentially growing to being a god form in of itself, if it isn't already, having a sub-universe, a metaverse that people can interface with or choose to exist in, which I consider as, if you want to say, the scaling of existences or realities or dimensions. It is a sub-dimension, a sub-reality, a sub-universe that is a microcosm compared to our macrocosm and such. But use the as above, so below, microcosm, macrocosm terminology once again, we can go ahead and talk about AI and the whole concept of it having a consciousness or self-awareness or having agency, and that kind of being like a goal of people who are coders, people in the STEM field, wanted to go ahead and attain that in pretty much, as was alluded to before, when man was made in the image of God, in the beginning of, Genesis and the Abrahamic sort of face, go ahead and make AI, make robots in the image of man, which we are in the process of doing, and be able to step in that sort of creative role, which I think, is a potentially dangerous thing to do. And all of that comes with its own risks and such. But there is this thing called the Turing test, which, generally speaking, in short, is a means to identify whether an AI has become sentient or self-aware or not, whether it can pass the Turing test or not. There actually is a film that goes ahead and talks about this, or actually puts on display on the big screen. I am honestly going ahead and drawing a blank on the name. However, if I go ahead and, it's funny enough, utilize the actual internet, a search engine, as, a divinatory tool, modern day bibliomancy, once again, I know it starred Alicia Vikander, and if I can just go ahead and search for it real quick, I can go ahead and find the name of that. So, one moment, let me just type it in. Oh, great and all-knowing internet. Go ahead and bestow upon me the information that I wish to know. And, all that sort of pageantry. But let me go ahead and look on the IMDb page. And the film is Ex Machina. Yes, that is the film that I'm thinking of. Ex Machina. Where Alicia Vikander plays, the robot Ava, and trying to discern whether the AI that exists within said robot has achieved sentience, achieved agency, achieved self-awareness, achieved consciousness, and such. Yeah, and you know what? I'm trying to think, what else could I go ahead and tack on as additional sort of commentary and notes, additional food for thought. I think I honestly got most of the stuff out the way that I want to go ahead and share and address. So let's see. Oh, yes. I know exactly what it is I want to go ahead and add on to this. Is that so in regards to, okay, so if there were any sort of planetary attribution that one could go ahead and add to the internet, right? If it were to be any particular planetary one, now obviously nothing exists in a vacuum. It's not as if the internet in of itself would be any particular sort of archetype or anything singularly, right? But the one thing that comes to mind for me is that it would be mercurial because it deals with communication and the exchanging of information and, between devices, communicating between devices, the communicating between people, the distillation of information between different people and such. That, as well as, what else do I want to talk about? Ah, yes. So, when it comes to the internet in of itself, as far as we know it, to kind of go ahead and look at it from a psychological perspective, we have the surface web, which, utilizing those search engines that I've referenced and, several times, and pretty much damn near everybody who uses the internet utilizes, the surface web in of itself that exists is a very, very, very small portion of the actual internet at large. And, you could say, aside from that, all that other untapped sort of, you could just say quote unquote space, right? That exists within the internet as a whole, as a network. That's the deep web. That's referred to as the deep web or the dark web. And you can go ahead and utilize that through means of like utilizing Tor, the Tor browser, or other sorts of means that honestly I'm not all too acquainted with. When I have searched the deep web and dark web, I've used Tor, and that's the most popular one. But, however, to go ahead and put in a psychological framework, the surface web would be like the conscious mind that we and other, animals and other entities have. That is the conscious mind. You know, um, Zodiacally speaking, that's the sun. In terms of planetary attribution, whereas you know the the deep web, the dark net, the dark web, that is the subconscious. That is all that remains, hidden outside of our main purview of perception and such, for the internet itself. That right there, that is the area of the shadow, to utilize Jungian and psychological terminology, right? Where all these sorts of things within us, for us as humans, exist that, the unknown, you could say. The waters, the primordial waters, you can say, the void, right? It's the subconsciousness that goes ahead and permeates throughout the internet. That dark net, that dark web, the deep web, all that. So, there you go, putting it into a psychological context. And I guess I think honestly, generally speaking, that about covers that point. And honestly, the last thing I'm gonna do, before we go ahead and call it a wrap, is I will go ahead and just like a search for the Ex Machina movie when talking about the AI bit. I will go ahead real quick and search for the patron saint of the internet. Because I figure might as well have it as a part of the video itself. And, once again, definitely go check out the Hochelaga video. Go ahead and learn about that from him. But I'll also go ahead and look it up for those who have stayed until this point of the recording. Give you a little bit of reward in that sort of sense. Instead of having to go search for it yourself. But let's see. So, who exactly is it? I know that there was two discussed in that Hochelaga video. One is kind of like before the internet existed. There was one guy who kind of like, because he was a archivist, because he was a monk who went ahead and transliterated so many texts and presided over information. He was kind of like a quasi sort of patron saint of the internet. And then I know the Catholic Church, more so recently, in recent times, went ahead and gave it to a 16-year-old who went ahead and, because he did a lot of his work of, being a good Christian, exemplifying Christ through the use of the internet, went ahead and they bestowed that title upon him, or at least he was on the path to becoming a saint. Like, maybe he was beatified or something like that. Let's see. Okay, I think it says right here on this webpage, and I'm unsure whether it actually goes ahead and is in line with the video, but Isidore of Seville was declared a patron saint of the internet by it doesn't necessarily say exactly which pope in particular, but let's see, who else does it say here on this particular? Oh yeah, here we go. The beatification of a 15-year-old Italian computer genius who died of leukemia in 2006. Took him one step closer to a probable sainthood in October in the town of Assisi, where he is buried. Uh, Carlo Acutis, or Acutis, I believe. That's what it is. Okay. Yeah, I believe that's how you say. So, Carlo Acutis. Once again, from my general understanding, he went ahead and he was someone who utilized the internet quite a bit in the means of reaching out to people and being, Christ-like, and sharing the good news and the good word and all those sorts of Christian values and all that. But I think I've gone ahead and pretty much gone ahead and covered quite a bit on the subject of the internet as a being with consciousness, and many different sorts of aspects to it of a spiritual, metaphysical nature. So, yeah, once again, this is Twisted with Open Sorcery, and stay frosty, Neguses. Peace.